Right. Last time it was pretty ragged. Okay, so today we want to talk about synchronicity, or as that's Carl Jung's word for it. Um, Serendipity is an easier word to use. Um, and that basically what it means is that uh, things are interconnected in a really, really deep way that we really don't quite understand. And that another way of understanding it is what we call just coincidental. That it is in fact the human's mind that makes the connection. Otherwise, the connection is not there, or at least not traceable. That it's traced into random events. An example of that would be um, that there was a moment when I was getting on the Sangha group just as Parker was leaving it, so that I could see him and he could see me, but that we both lost each other because all of the connecting and the switching and the button pushing and all of mouse clicking had already happened. But there was just that one moment in time, couldn't may have not even lasted a second. Okay, so that's one kind of a synchronicity, which has to do with coincidence. Uh, but that it's not magical in the sense that it could have been that I was just getting back onto the group and that in fact I was too slow. If I had been there a moment or even a second earlier, then Parker wouldn't have already logged off. So this is one kind. Another kind is that I will mention something and the student will respond to it in the sense of um, that I mention a particular song to a student as an example for something that we're talking about in Dhamma. And she will say then, oh, we were playing that song just last night. It's still sitting here on the turntable. That she can just look and there's that song and I'm talking about it. How did that happen? Okay. Another example of it would be when two old friends that I haven't seen for months happened to call at the same time on Skype. Not expecting it, just out of the blue, and both of them just make a call. All right. So the question is something happening that we're unaware of, or is something happening that we're not aware of, but it all happens within the human mind, making those connections? All right. So if we say then that the human mind is making those connections, normally those kind of connections are made when someone sees it often. It's because they're paying attention. And those kind of things just happen a lot. Just because of coincidence, just because of serendipity, just because of happenstance. But so much stuff is happening all the time that there's bound to be things that are happening all the time that a human will grab a hold of and say, look at that connection, look at that. But in fact, the things are not really connected other than that the human can see the connection there. And what that means then is that people are paying attention. They're looking at what's going on, but they're not necessarily either bragging about it as if they are special because they can see things, or the other one, which is getting magical thinking about hoping that we can control that or we can make serendipity happen more often, or that we can predict when serendipity is going to happen, and other things like this. Okay, that's a bit too far. That's a bridge too far. That's real magical thinking. So there is a kind of a bit of magical thinking in the seeing of the connection itself, to where, in fact, the example of the phonograph record was is that just because we enjoyed the same kind of music doesn't mean anything, right? There's another example of that, and I was talking to a student and mentioned an activity, and so I started talking about dishwashing, washing this dish. Rather than looking at the pile that has to be done, we're just enjoying this dish. And he immediately pops up and says, I'm a professional dishwasher. And he was really blown out that I would use that as an analogy, because he didn't tell me that he was a dishwasher. All right. Was that magic, or was that just merely a connection that the humans made? The question is, uh, basically, without that kind of answer, because that's the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is, did you get a load of that? And start enjoying all of this serendipity, start enjoying all of these coincidences, to recognizing that the world is, in fact, a symphony orchestra, that the whole thing is not wired or geared together. It's just kind of in sympathetic vibration, that things just kind of happen, um, gotten into a rhythm. And so that's the way of looking at it, is that the universe is kind of in a rhythm, and things happen like that on a regular basis. And that it is a great joy for us to be able to see that stuff, to recognize that there it is. But it is greed to want to control it. That in fact we don't even understand what it is. You can take the analogy of people going hunting, and that all they saw was the flash of something brown going like that way off in the distance, right? That's all they saw. They just saw a flash. Okay, that was serendipity right there. That if he happened to have not been looking at that particular second, he would have just not seen it. But because now they're out hunting, when they see that, they make the connection, oh, that's my bear. And so now they have to go catch it, kill it, right? Unlucky for the bear that serendipity happened. But really, it's the greed in the man's mind. That's my serendipity, or that's my bear, that gives rise then to the delusion that we can control the serendipity itself, rather than perhaps the object of the serendipity. And this is magical thinking, and yes, it is old, because serendipity has been happening, synchronicity has been happening for many thousands of centuries. It's just that humans are paying attention to it now. But even in the time of the Buddha and before, and in India with the yogis and all of this kind of stuff. And if the yogi has willpower, that means that he has the power to see the serendipity and get a big kick out of it. But that does not mean that he can control it, because it's something that's happening outside. And so this kind of magical thinking is part and parcel of ordinary life. We think that this is kind of magical powers belong in the realm of religion, and also that Buddhism belongs in the realm of religion, but in fact are quite separate, in the sense that magical power is nothing but just a kind of power. And that what makes it magical is the impossibility of it. The impossibility of it is what makes it magical, because all of the other, for instance, real power, like for instance Putin, or what's happening in Hungary, or the destruction of one lifestyle in a society, that's happened many times. Societies have risen and fallen. So the kind of powers that create that are real, but they're rare. And that when people are trying to bring about a change in civilization, like is, for instance, happening in many places in the world today, a lot of people are using magical power or the power of their religion in order to bring about actual, real, powerful changes. In other words, my religion is blah, blah, therefore I think that fetuses are babies and that we should preserve them, and therefore we have to now pass laws in order to prevent abortion. That kind of thinking is magical thinking. And here the magical thinking is that is my baby. When in fact it's not. It's not even a baby. It's just a magical thought. And so magical thinking and power often go hand in hand. And so we can call it a magical power, but in fact the reality is that almost all grasping and clinging for power is based upon magical greed. And so you could say then that all thirst for power is magical. Why? Because we don't need it to survive. It's unnecessary. It's completely irrelevant. All we need is the power to control one's own life rather than trying to take power over other things, the power over the weather or the power over lightning or perhaps the power over the girl down the street. You know the kind of thing that I'm talking about. All right. It's always that lust for power. But if we examine that lust for power, what we can see underneath it is that what people are actually looking for when they're looking for power is they're looking for safety and security. They're looking for the ability to preserve their own self, their own identity, who I am, or maybe to aggrandize that. Because if the yogi can be seen as magically powerful, then that will somehow gain him some advantage so that he'll be more safe. But if that yogi has enough real power inside to feel safe, which comes from his attitude then is the attitude of, I can handle this. I don't need any additional power, magical or otherwise. I've got all the power I need already. That's when we can handle things, and that's the actual solution to the problem about power, magical or otherwise. And that is that we don't need power. We've got enough already. How much power do we need? The power enough to take a deep breath, the power to throw out thoughts of power, the power of being joyful that I've got enough power that I don't need any more, and so that we could just sit and be happy. And while we're sitting and happy, we begin to see, look at all of these connections. Wow, there's a whole lot of stuff going on. Normally, the guys who are out lusting and seeking for power, they often miss some of the subtleties and some of the connections that would have gained them more power if they had been able to observe it. That, in fact, is a very, very well-known point about knowledge is power. That in any armed conflict, any military operation, the whole point is to deceive your enemy in order to take advantage. If the enemy knows everything about you, then he will defeat you easily when you don't know nothing about him. This is well known, right? This is where Chung Tzu's art of warfare, way long ago, is all about how to deceive. In other words, if you've got a small group, you want to make it look big. If you've got a big group, you want to make it look small. If you're here, you want to make the enemy think you're over there. You want to keep everything up in the air. That's the whole idea about the power of knowledge, is that if we can see things and see connections, that has its own power, but it's not a kind of power that comes because we wanted it. It's a kind of power that came because we were looking at what was going on without wanting any power. Just saw what was happening. And so a lot of that power then comes from right attitude as well as observational power. That in fact, if I'm actually looking at a student and observing him, noticing his behaviors and whatnot, I'll begin to know the student better than he knows himself, because the student's not paying attention to any of that kind of stuff. So that's another way of looking at it, is that real power comes from knowledge. Real power comes from knowledge that's gained through observation, to being able to see connections and putting things together. That in fact, that's what makes the human mind that has the kind of power that it does. And that is that frontal cortex is very good at observing and making connections, seeing how things are pointing, looking at the direction that things are going in. But almost always that takes too much work for people, that we actually are quite lazy. And so we would rather follow our instincts just to go along to get along and not really have to pay that much attention. And so, in fact, this skill that we're developing, this skill of sati, is the skill of waking up and paying attention, remembering to observe, remembering to see, remember to continue to take in new information rather than relying upon the old information. So this is where power comes from, not from wanting it, especially wanting magical power, because all we're left with is a state of want. Because we never got what we wanted. We didn't get the mind in the right state to be able to gain real power. So the real power is the observation and making the connections, rather than trying to gain control over some magical concept called serendipity or synchronicity. It's some sort of magical force out there in the universe someplace. So I have both talked about how wonderful it is and also that it doesn't even exist, that it's really all in the human mind. But the human is now capable of making those kind of connections and seeing things in a way that allow us to understand things at a much different and let us say profound level, because we're paying attention. And one of those things is to be able to pay attention to what's happening within one's own mind, and to recognize that that's where most of the serendipity happens anyway, is right there in one's own mind, that we're creating it. Have you frozen? Yeah, I think it's completely frozen. I thought it was moving around a little bit.